The rain was coming down in sharp, relentless sheets over the glass towers of the city, turning neon lights into trembling reflections on the wet streets below. In the middle of this storm, where most people hurried into luxury cars or disappeared under umbrellas of expensive fabric, something unusual stopped the world of one of the most powerful men in the city. A billionaire stood frozen at the edge of a crowded street, his tailored coat slowly soaking through, his security detail suddenly irrelevant as his attention locked onto a scene that didn't belong in his world at all. A frail mother, clearly exhausted and struggling with life's weight, was leaning heavily on the shoulder of a homeless teenage boy. The boy, dressed in torn clothes and worn-out shoes, was holding her upright with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone who had nothing. There was no hesitation in him, no fear of judgment, only steady patience, as if protecting her had become the only thing that mattered in his life. The billionaire couldn't understand what he was seeing. In his world, weakness was hidden, dependence was disguised, and vulnerability was something people paid others to manage. Yet here, in the middle of a storm and chaos, a woman who looked like she had nothing left in life was trusting her entire weight on a boy the world had already forgotten. And even more shocking was the boy's calm strength, as if he had been born for this very moment. Something inside the billionaire cracked open quietly, something he had long buried under success, money, and control. If this story touches your heart, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Most Wanted Stories. If you believe in kindness and second chances, because sometimes the most powerful miracles begin in the most unexpected places. The billionaire's name was Adrian Cole, a man who had built an empire from nothing and had long since stopped believing in anything he could not calculate or control. His life was a structure of precision, meetings, acquisitions, and profit margins. Emotional decisions had no place in his world anymore. Yet that evening, standing under the storm, he felt something deeply irrational pulling him forward toward the scene he could not ignore. The boy's appearance suggested abandonment by society. He looked no older than 17 or 18, his frame thin but steady, his posture alert in a way that spoke of survival rather than comfort. The woman leaning on him appeared ill, her movements slow and fragile, as if every step was a negotiation with pain. But what unsettled Adrian the most was not their condition, but the bond between them. There was trust there. Pure, uncalculated trust. As Adrian stepped closer, the boy noticed him. There was no fear in the teenager's expression, only quiet caution, as though he had learned early in life that not all danger came from the street. Some came dressed in suits. The mother, however, did not react with alarm. Instead, she adjusted slightly, still leaning on the boy, as if his presence was her only stability in a collapsing world. Adrian ordered his driver and security to stay back. For the first time in years, he walked without protection. Something about the boy demanded that kind of respect. The rain continued to fall, soaking everything equally, erasing distinctions of wealth, status, and power. In that moment, all three of them looked like survivors of different wars. Adrian learned in fragments what had happened without needing detailed explanations. The mother had been working multiple low-paying jobs while battling a severe illness she could no longer afford to treat. The boy, not her son by blood, but bound to her through circumstance and gratitude, had appeared months earlier when she collapsed outside a shelter. He had stayed with her since then, refusing to leave even when the world gave him every reason to. He had no home, no steady food, no safety. Yet he had chosen to become her strength. Adrian, who had spent his entire life measuring value in numbers, suddenly faced something he could not quantify. The boy had nothing, yet he was carrying everything that mattered to someone else. A memory stirred inside Adrian, something long buried. Years ago, before money and success hardened him, there had been a time when someone had once helped him in a moment of helplessness. A stranger had extended kindness when he had nothing to offer in return. He had forgotten that memory over time, or perhaps buried it beneath ambition. but now it resurfaced like a wound reopening. The storm intensified, and Adrian made a decision that surprised even him. He instructed his driver to bring a vehicle closer, not for himself, but for them. The boy hesitated, instinctively suspicious, but the mother's weak condition left no room for pride or refusal. Slowly, carefully, they were guided into the warmth of the vehicle, away from the freezing rain. Inside the car, silence filled the space, thick and unfamiliar. Adrian watched them from across the seat, unable to reconcile what he was witnessing with everything he believed about the world. The boy never let go of the woman's hand, even for a second, as if afraid she might disappear if he loosened his grip. That single gesture spoke louder than anything Adrian had ever heard in boardrooms or negotiations. The hospital they reached was one of the finest in the city. Adrian ensured she was admitted immediately, overriding every bureaucratic delay with a single phone call. Doctors rushed in, nurses moved with urgency, and suddenly the fragile woman was surrounded by care she had never been able to afford. The boy stayed outside the room, refusing to leave his position near the door. He looked out of place in the polished hallways, like a fragment of another world that had accidentally wandered into luxury. Adrian observed him from a distance, studying the way he reacted to every sound from inside the room. Every small movement of medical staff made him tense, not because he distrusted them, but because he feared losing the only person who had ever truly needed him. Hours passed like that, stretched between hope and uncertainty. The billionaire, who was used to controlling outcomes, found himself powerless in the one situation that mattered most in that moment. And then something shifted. The doctors eventually confirmed that the woman would survive, though recovery would be long and complicated. Relief washed over the boy so intensely that his knees nearly gave out. For the first time since Adrian had seen him, the boy allowed himself to breathe without tension. Adrian watched quietly, realizing something uncomfortable but undeniable. Wealth had given him everything except the ability to matter in the way this boy already did. In the days that followed, Adrian began visiting the hospital more often than he intended. He told himself it was curiosity, but it was something deeper. The boy, whose name he learned was Elias, never asked for anything. He never tried to take advantage of the situation. Even when offered food, shelter, or money, he accepted only what was necessary for survival, never more. Elias eventually shared pieces of his past without being prompted. He had grown up without stability, moving between temporary shelters, abandoned buildings, and streets that never truly belonged to him. He had learned early that trust was dangerous and attachment often led to loss. Yet the woman in the hospital had been different. She had treated him not as invisible, but as human, so he stayed. Adrian began to see that Elias was not just surviving, he was choosing something greater than survival. He was choosing loyalty in a world that rarely rewarded it. Meanwhile, Adrian's own life began to feel increasingly hollow. Board meetings continued, profits increased, deals closed as always, but something inside him had shifted permanently. He found himself thinking less about expansion and more about meaning, less about acquisition and more about connection. One evening, after a long silence outside the hospital room, Adrian made an unexpected offer. He would ensure medical care, education, and stability for both Elias and the woman. He would remove every obstacle life had placed in their path. In return, he expected nothing. Elias refused at first, not out of pride alone, but out of fear that accepting help might erase the fragile independence he had fought so hard to maintain. But Adrian did not withdraw the offer. Instead, he remained present, consistent, and patient in a way he had never been with anyone before. Over time, something shifted again. Trust, once broken by life, began to rebuild itself in small steps. The woman recovered slowly, and when she finally learned the full extent of what Elias had done for her, she broke down in tears that carried years of pain, gratitude, and disbelief. She understood then what Adrian had already begun to see clearly. Elias was not just a boy who survived the streets. He was someone capable of extraordinary selflessness in a world that rarely recognized it. As months passed, Elias was given access to education, mentorship, and structure. He struggled at first, not academically, but emotionally, adjusting to a world that suddenly expected him to think beyond survival. Yet he persisted. Slowly, steadily, he began to grow into something he had never been allowed to become before. Adrian watched this transformation with a strange mix of admiration and envy. For all his wealth, he realized Elias possessed something far rarer. Purpose born not from comfort, but from compassion. One evening, standing in the quiet of his penthouse overlooking the city, Adrian finally understood what had changed him. It was not wealth that defined a person. It was what they chose to carry when no one was watching. And Elias had carried someone when the world had already decided she did not matter. Near the end of this journey, something unexpected happened in Adrian's life. He began redirecting parts of his fortune into shelters, healthcare initiatives, and programs for abandoned youth. Not for recognition, not for legacy, but because he could no longer ignore what he had seen in that rain-soaked street. The boy who had once had nothing had given him something money never could perspective. One afternoon, Adrian visited the hospital one last time before the woman's discharge. Elias stood beside her, no longer just surviving but slowly learning to exist in a world that had once rejected him. There was no grand speech, no dramatic declaration, only quiet understanding between them that something irreversible had taken place in all their lives. Just before leaving, Adrian paused. He asked Elias a simple question about what he intended to do next with his life. The answer was not ambitious or grand. It was simple, grounded in the same compassion that had defined everything he had done so far. He wanted to help people who had no one, the same way someone had once helped them. Adrian nodded, realizing that some legacies are not built in boardrooms, but in moments of human courage that most people never stop to notice. A special request before the end of this story: if this journey touched your heart in any way, take a moment to comment your thoughts below and share what kindness means to you. As Adrian walked away from the hospital for the final time, he did not feel like a man leaving behind two people he had helped. He felt like someone who had finally been awakened by them. And in that realization, the city outside seemed different too. Less like a collection of buildings and more like a place filled with stories still waiting to be seen.